When my brother sold the family farm without consulting me, I confronted him. He laughed and told me I was too emotional and irrelevant. He then told me to leave, shutting the door in my face. As I walked away, heartbroken, I swore I would make him regret it. What he didn't know is that I was already lining up a plan to take back what was rightfully mine. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to even think about revenge, let alone plan it. But when someone steals a piece of your soul and laughs in your face, something changes in you. I was born and raised in Mount Vernon, Missouri. It's the kind of place where people still wave from their trucks, and everyone knows what church you go to. Our family farm sat just outside town. Nothing fancy. About 90 acres of pasture and crop, with a 2-story farmhouse my great-grandfather built himself. That place was more than land to me. It was our history. Our blood was in that soil. After Dad died in 2012, the will was clear. The farm was split between Scott and me. 50-50. He got the farmhouse because he lived there and I got half the land. We agreed we'd manage it together. We even signed joint maintenance agreements and co-ownership papers. I still have them filed away. Scott was always the louder one. In high school, he was a star linebacker. Everyone thought he'd go pro, but that didn't pan out. He stayed home, helping Dad on the farm, and eventually took over the day-to-day when Dad got sick. I was the one who left, first college in Columbia, then a job in Springfield in insurance. I stayed close, though. I drove down every few weekends to help during harvest. I paid my share of the taxes and upkeep, even helped cover a new combine one year when cash was tight. But the truth is, Scott never really saw me as equal. He saw me as the soft little brother who left, not the one who stayed and did the real work. That resentment built over the years. I felt it every time he said things like, "You wouldn't understand, you're not here," or "This ain't a desk job." Still, I thought we had an understanding. I trusted him. That trust broke in February 2022. I was visiting Mom's grave when one of our neighbors, Tom, he's owned the next farm over for 40 years, came over to say hi. Out of nowhere, he asks, "So, you finally moving back now that they're building out east?" I blinked. "Building what?" He looked confused. "You don't know? They started grading last week. Rumor is it's gonna be a housing development. 12, maybe 15 houses. Real quick job." I felt my stomach drop. "Where exactly?" "Eastfield. By that grove where your dad used to deer hunt." I thanked him, tried to act calm, but inside, I was shaking. That land, our land, wasn't just dirt. It was where my dad taught me to shoot, where we buried our first dog, where we planted winter wheat together during his last year alive. I knew every tree, every stone. I drove straight to the farm. My hands were shaking so hard on the wheel, I almost veered off the road. When I pulled up, Scott was out front unloading feed. He saw me and rolled his eyes, like I was some annoying neighbor. "What are you doing here?" he said. I didn't even bother with small talk. "You sold the East Field?" He shrugged, like it was nothing.
"Yeah, good deal.
Developers paid more than market." "You didn't tell me. I didn't sign anything. How the hell did you sell my land?" He laughed. Laughed right in my face. "You're barely involved. You haven't lived here in over a decade. I'm the one keeping this place afloat. You're too emotional about this crap. I paid for that land. I still do. I pay taxes, maintenance. Yeah, and I do all the damn work," he snapped. "I got tired of waiting for you to grow a spine. It's my farm now. You're irrelevant." That word, irrelevant. Like I was a speck of dust in the rearview mirror of his life. Then he stepped back and slammed the door. I stood on that porch for a long time. It was freezing cold, but I didn't feel it. My face was hot with rage. I wanted to break the window. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I walked down the gravel driveway and got in my truck. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared ahead and told myself, this isn't over. Scott didn't know what I had. I had every record, every co-ownership agreement, every joint expense, emails where he acknowledged our shared ownership. And I had something else, a long fuse, and a strong memory. He thought he stole from a weak little brother. But I was already planning how to make him regret every damn step he took on that land. After Scott slammed the door in my face, I didn't go home right away. I drove out to the east field, the one he sold, and just sat there in my truck. There were survey markers in the ground already. Little orange flags staked in a crooked line across what used to be winter wheat. I got out and picked one up. My name was still on the deed, and yet here I was, standing on my land that some developer now owned, thanks to my own brother. I spent the next few days back in Springfield, barely eating, barely sleeping, just reading and rereading every document I had. I found emails from as far back as 2015 where Scott and I agreed to a co-ownership structure. I pulled bank records showing I paid half the property taxes every single year. I even had proof that I helped fund repairs on the tractor and fencing. My lawyer, Carla, was an old college friend who owed me a favor. She looked over everything and said, "You have a real case. He couldn't have sold the land without you unless he forged something." And that's when it really hit me. Scott hadn't just ignored me. He'd committed fraud. Carla pulled the sale documents from the county recorder's office. My signature was nowhere on them. But Scott had submitted a notarized statement saying he was the sole surviving heir and owner of record. He lied. And he got it notarized. I don't know who he paid off or how he convinced them, but he committed a felony to get me out of the way. I called him. He didn't answer. I drove back down, and he wouldn't open the door. The third time, he sent me a text. "Back off. You've got no case. Just take your name off and move on." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just cold arrogance. And then came the worst part. One of the developers, some smug guy named Brian, called me. Said he'd heard there might be confusion about the land ownership. Said he wanted to work it out peacefully. I told him flat out I never signed anything. He paused, then said, "Well, that's between you and your brother. We already paid. We've got permits, and we're breaking ground next month." Scott didn't just screw me. He made me look like some crazy ex-owner trying to derail progress. People in town started talking. I heard from 2 old classmates that Scott was telling folks I abandoned the farm and was trying to extort him now that it's worth something. That's when I knew this wasn't just about land anymore. He wanted me erased. From the farm, from the town, from our family story. I started digging into more than just the sale. I requested all the property records from the last 10 years. Turns out, Scott had been slowly shifting ownership of other parcels too. Small ones at first, a 3-acre woodlot, an old barn, but each time he used a similar method. Claimed sole ownership. No consent from me. Quietly sold or leased them for side cash. He'd been planning this for years, testing how much he could take before I noticed. And now that the land was worth real money, he went all in. I told Carla to prepare a civil suit. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and co-owner misrepresentation. But lawsuits take time. And meanwhile, they were pouring concrete on land that was still legally mine. I started going to the county board meetings. I made noise. I brought photos, documents, copies of the will. I told them this wasn't just a zoning issue, it was theft. And then, one night, my truck got keyed outside the diner. Big long scratch across the driver's side. No note. No witnesses. But everyone in that town knew who I was fighting with. Scott had crossed the line. And now I had nothing to lose. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had one more card to play. Something he never expected me to find. I wasn't just going to stop the sale. I was going to take the farm from him completely. I thought I knew the worst of it. I thought the fraud, the land theft, the lies to the county were the full picture. But the deeper I went, the more I realized how far Scott had fallen and how long he'd been planning to cut me out. It started with an envelope I found in one of Dad's old file boxes, the kind we stored in my storage unit in Springfield after the funeral. I hadn't touched it in years, but something told me to look. Inside was a letter from our mom, handwritten, dated 6 months before she died. It wasn't addressed to me or Scott. It was addressed to whoever finds this after we're gone. In the letter, she wrote about her fears. She talked about Scott's anger, his gambling, and how he'd started taking out loans in Dad's name. She said she kept quiet because she didn't want to break the family apart. But she begged whoever read the letter to make sure the farm stays in the family, not in the hands of debt collectors or strangers. That letter hit me like a brick. I always knew Scott was reckless, but loans? Gambling? I needed proof. So I pulled a credit report on the farm's LLC, the one we both owned. That's when I found the second landmine, a $150,000 loan taken out 3 years ago using the farm as collateral. Scott had signed it alone, forged my consent as co-owner, and the loan had defaulted 6 months earlier. He hadn't just sold my land. He had bet the entire farm to cover his debts. That's why he sold to the developers. He was out of time. He needed fast cash before the bank came knocking. And here's where things got dirty. Carla found the loan's original filing. It included a clause: if the debt wasn't settled, the bank could seize not just the farm, but all income tied to the LLC, including any new housing development profits if the land had been illegally transferred. Which meant I had leverage, big leverage. But that wasn't the only surprise. A guy named Lucas, a seasonal worker who used to help us with hay baling in the summers, reached out. Said he heard I was fighting Scott and thought I should know something. We met at a gas station on the edge of town. He told me Scott had secretly leased 10 acres of the west pasture to a commercial hog company. They'd been using it as waste runoff storage, hidden behind temporary fencing and no trespassing signs. That was illegal without a permit, and worse, it contaminated part of our creek. I drove out the next morning. Sure enough, there were tire tracks, runoff ponds, and rows of waste barrels hidden behind a tarp wall. Scott wasn't just stealing from me. He was poisoning the land to make a few more dollars. I took photos, videos. I called the Department of Natural Resources and filed an anonymous tip. Within a week, they sent someone down. The next time I saw Scott was at a public zoning meeting. He walked in wearing that same cocky smirk, sat across from me, and didn't even acknowledge I was there. But when the DNR official stood up and asked who held environmental liability for the contaminated creek, that smirk disappeared. Scott stood up to object, and that's when I handed my file to the county board. Photos, letters, bank documents, loan records. Carla had even subpoenaed the notary who witnessed Scott's forged sales signature. She confessed on record that she'd never met me and Scott paid her in cash. Scott looked like a man watching his world fall apart in slow motion. But I wasn't done, because while he was busy fighting me in court, losing control of the farm, and getting hammered with fines from the state, I was making a different call, to the bank. I offered to buy the outstanding farm debt. All of it. With proof of co-ownership and fraud, the bank accepted. I became the lien holder. And now Scott owed me everything. After I became the lien holder on the farm's debt, Scott's entire world started closing in. At first, he didn't believe it. He called my bluff, said he'd fight it in court, but by then, the evidence was stacked higher than the silo he used to brag about rebuilding. My lawyer served him notice of default on the loan. He had 30 days to pay or the property would be seized. He had nothing left. The developer money was gone, eaten up by debts, lawyer fees, and whatever he wasted on gambling or hiding his tracks. And when the DNR hit him with the environmental violation fines, it buried him even deeper. They found proof of years of unpermitted hog waste runoff. It wasn't just a fine, it was a criminal charge. Scott begged for an extension. He emailed, called, even had one of our cousins try to talk me down. Said he was willing to make things right. That he got carried away. I didn't respond. He wanted forgiveness now that he was drowning, but when I stood on that porch a year earlier, heartbroken, humiliated, he laughed in my face and called me irrelevant. Now I was the bank. I was the court. I was the reckoning he never saw coming. Day 31 came. We seized the farm. I didn't do it quietly. I filed the paperwork in person at the county office. I made sure the local paper got the story right. Heir reclaims stolen family land after legal battle. I brought all the evidence. The forged documents. The fake notary. The letters from Mom. They printed it, front page, with Scott's mugshot from the DNR charges. His name was ruined. But I wasn't finished. I got the development project halted. The buyers sued him for fraud. The county pulled his permits and froze his remaining accounts. They even launched an investigation into his other land deals. And then came the part one didn't expect. People started reaching out. Neighbors. Old friends. Even the clerk at the local hardware store. They told me how they always thought something was off, how Scott talked about me like I abandoned the family, how he told them I never cared about the farm. I corrected the record. I told the truth. 6 months later, I moved back. Not to live on the farm, I leased it to a veteran co-op that runs organic crops and livestock, no chemicals, no shortcuts. I drive down every month. I walk the fields. I sit on the porch. But I left one thing untouched. The East Field, where Scott sold out our family name. I fenced it off. Put up a wooden sign with just one word, burned into it. Betrayal. Scott left town not long after. Last I heard, he was renting a trailer near Joplin, still blaming everyone but himself. But he doesn't get to rewrite the story anymore. I do. And I wrote the ending myself. He thought I was too emotional, too soft, too far away. He forgot something about quiet men like me. We remember. We wait. And when the time is right, we take back what's ours.